November 4, 1980, 6:30 a.m., minutes before the storming of the U.S. Embassy. 350 Iranian students gather at Tehran Polytechnic. They're only a few blocks away from the United States Embassy located in the capital of Iran. They call themselves Danshoyane-Kat-e-Imam, or students followers of the Imam's line. They're fueled by anti-American sentiment and a revolution full of promises. The group is made up of both young men and women who are willing to do whatever it takes to have their voices heard. The students proceed toward the embassy. Several women hide bolt cutters under their chadors. They reach the iron gates guarding the entrance to the compound. Some scale the walls while others work on cutting the lock open. The alarm is sounded as U.S. diplomats, soldiers, and staff scramble to escape the wave of Iranians flooding through the entryway. Marines desperately try to get whoever they can out the back, but as no one is prepared, their response is slow. A few people make it out, dodging through alleyways to avoid the angry mob that's congregating all around the walls of the embassy. 66 other U.S. citizens are captured by the hundreds of students and militants who have now taken control of the compound. They throw everyone they locate into several rooms and lock the doors. Guards are posted outside to make sure no one escapes. The captors raid the building, pulling open filing cabinets and going through every document they can get their hands on. They're looking for incriminating evidence, and in the coming days, they will find what they're looking for. The U.S. Embassy has been captured. This is no longer a refuge for U.S. citizens in Iran, but a fortress containing hostages and guarded by young revolutionaries. No blood is shed, but in the coming days tensions will rise, threats will be made, and the United States will prepare for war. Spring 1977, 3 years before the storming of the U.S. Embassy. The people of Iran have had enough. The oppressive rule of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi is tearing the country apart. Writers, academics, and activists publish open letters condemning the current leadership and the white revolution that's been implemented for over a decade. These reforms have led to economic growth, urbanization, and a move toward more liberal views, many of which allow more rights for women. However, not everyone is happy. Many feel like they're losing their culture and customs. The westernization of the country has conservative religious leaders in a frenzy, and many question the Shah's absolute power over the nation. A 10-night poetry festival is held at Goethe Institute in Tehran. Here, thousands of people discuss the need to return the country to its traditional Islamic beliefs. Lectures are given, and the people of Iran outrightly voice their concerns about the government. They don't want to lose their heritage. There's a growing mistrust, not just with the Shah and his leadership, but with countries like the United States, which seem to be trying to westernize and control Iran. In November of 1977, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi travels to Washington, D.C. to meet with the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter. When the Shah arrives, he's greeted warmly by the president, but the meeting is disrupted by Iranian students protesting outside the White House. The police and Secret Service used tear gas and anti-riot gear to disperse the growing number of Iranian protesters. The following month, President Carter visits Iran to meet with the Shah once again. During his trip, he describes the country as an island of stability in one of the most troubled areas of the world. The coming years will prove that his words could not be further from the truth. 1978, 2 years before the storming of the U.S. Embassy. A revolutionary by the name of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini has been particularly outspoken about the Shah's regime and the changes being made to the country. He, like many of the more religious leaders in Iran, wants the country and the Middle East as a whole to return to their Islamic roots. Khomeini was exiled from Iran after being arrested in 1964 for his harsh rhetoric against the Shah and the United States. He lived in Iraq for many years before moving to Paris, where he continues to be an outspoken proponent of removing the Shah from power and implementing a religious republic that follows the tenets of Shia law. The Iranian government launches a smear campaign against Khomeini, condemning his views and actions. This sends many into an outrage over what are clearly egregious claims against a man many in Iran see as a respected religious leader. One of the largest bazaars in the country, located in Qom, closes in protest over the character assassination campaign against Khomeini. Many of the country's largest seminaries are located here. Protesters take to the streets and tear down symbols of the Shah and his monarchy. They clash with the government security forces, and at least 5 people die in the conflict. On the 40th day following the death of the protesters in Qom, mourning ceremonies are held across the city. This is a Shia tradition in the wake of death. However, during this time, a student who is protesting in Tabriz is killed, leading to further clashes between the Iranian people and the government forces. More violence ensues. Protests begin breaking out in every major city in the country. The riots and the violence spread like wildfire as the people of Iran rise up against the Shah. It seems as if at any moment the entire country could be plunged into civil war. Festivals are cancelled and martial law is declared in cities like Isfahan. Savak agents, who are the Shah's secret police force, round up anyone who is seen as a threat to the current regime. The organization consists of around 5,000 soldiers and uses torture and brutal interrogation methods to gather information about the growing revolution. On Friday, September 8, 1978, the morning after the Shah declares martial law across the country, his security forces open fire at protesters in Tehran's Jaleh Square. At least 100 people die. This date will be remembered as Black Friday in Iran. 2 months after the massacre in Jaleh Square, Prime Minister Sharif Imami resigns and is succeeded by General Gholamreza Azari. The Shah appears on national television to speak of peace between the government and the growing number of people crying out for change. He claims, "I heard the voice of your revolution. As Shah of Iran, as well as an Iranian citizen, I cannot but approve your revolution." Many see the Shah's words as meaningless. Their suspicions are confirmed on December 6th, when President Jimmy Carter reaffirms his support for the Shah and his government. When nothing changes, millions of people flood into the streets, parks, and outside of government buildings to protest the rule of the Shah and demand he be removed from power. A major tenet of these protests is that the people want Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini to return from exile and help lead the country in revolution. January 1979, 10 months before the storming of the U.S. Embassy. Khomeini works with other Islamic religious leaders in Paris to form the Revolutionary Council that will coordinate the transition of power in Iran. The civil unrest and enormous support for the revolution have made it clear that the Shah's days controlling the country are numbered. There will be a shift in power, and Khomeini is positive that Iran will become an Islamic republic where religion becomes the guiding principle for the future of the nation. On January 16th, the Shah and his family board a private plane. The government claims that he's only going on vacation to Egypt, but his departing words to Prime Minister Shapur Bakhtiar give a clear indication that this will likely be the last time Pahlavi will step foot in Iran. He tells his Prime Minister, "I give Iran into your care, yours and God's." In a matter of months, the Iranian people will be screaming for the Shah's return so he can be held accountable for his corrupt and brutal reign over the last 18 years. February 1979, 9 months before the storming of the U.S. Embassy. On the 1st of February, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini arrives in Iran for the first time since its 15-year exile began. He's greeted by the roar of applause as he makes his way through the streets of Tehran. He meets with other revolutionary leaders in the capital to discuss the transition of power, but also what should be done about the Americans. Many people on both the far right and far left of the revolution are skeptical of the U.S.'s interests in Iran. The fact that the former Shah was so close to D.C. only deepens their mistrust. Not everyone who remains in Iran supports the revolution, however. Prime Minister Bakhtiar still claims he is in control, even though Khomeini has appointed Mehdi Bazargan to be prime minister under his Revolutionary Council. Bakhtiar announces to the country that there is still a nationwide curfew that will be enforced by martial law. Khomeini immediately follows this announcement with one of his own, informing the people of Iran to ignore the former prime minister's proclamation to rise up in defiance. The revolution is in full swing, and the former government can do nothing to stop it. Rather than taking sides, the Iranian armed forces declares neutrality as the power in the country shifts. This abstinence from the military causes the Shah's government to quickly crumble. Bakhtiar and many other former supporters of the old monarchy flee Iran. However, their misdeeds will not go unpunished. The revolutionaries will not easily forget how the Shah and his regime tried to westernize their country. Years after Bakhtiar flees to Paris, he's found with a bullet in the back of his head. 3 Iranian assassins were sent to eliminate him for the role he played during the Shah's rule. 2 of the assassins escaped back to Iran, 1 is captured in Switzerland. Shapur Bakhtiar will not be the first or last Iranian diplomat to be killed for his time in office prior to the Iranian Revolution. Demonstrations and protests have been consistently happening outside of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran for weeks. Many Iranians want the American presence in their country removed. For the most part, the demonstrations are peaceful. However, since the Shah fled the country, things have begun to escalate. The situation is getting increasingly dangerous for any U.S. citizen still in Iran. On February 14th, the U.S. Embassy is assaulted for the first time. This attack will end in bloodshed and torture. At 10:15 a.m., hundreds of members of the Organization of Iranian People's Fedai Guerrillas attack the embassy. They climb the walls surrounding the buildings even as some U.S. Marines fire warning shots. Bullets ricochet off the gate and embed themselves in the stone structures around the compound. The moment Iranian boots hit the ground, they unload their own weapons at the building. Machine gun fire and rifle fire force the Marines to take cover and everyone inside to hit the floor. More and more men come over the wall and advance on the embassy. It's a desperate situation. The Marines return fire with birdshot to give the people inside the embassy time to destroy top-secret documents and coding equipment. As the Iranian guerrilla fighters continue to close the gap between the outer wall and the compound, the Marines fall back. They order everyone into the communications room and begin filling the bottom floors with tear gas to hopefully dissuade the heavily armed communist militia. But this only slows them down. The attackers run up the stairs and corner the Americans in the communication room. Ambassador William H. Sullivan gives the order to surrender. The Marines lay down their weapons and wait for the incoming surge of insurgents. There are approximately 100 to 150 people in the compound, about half the number that had been stationed there before the revolution. The staff is ordered to lie on the floor by the gunmen, while the other insurgents tear through the building looking for any incriminating evidence. Their goal is to crush the spread of Western ideologies, and the U.S. Embassy is a good place to start. While this is happening, a Marine named Kenneth Krause is taken hostage and moved to another location. His kidnappers torture him and try to convict him of murder. During the firefight, an Iranian employee working at the embassy is killed. Marines and 3 other American staff are wounded. 1 hour after the attack on the U.S. Embassy, the Deputy Prime Minister of the Provisional Revolutionary Government, Dr. Ibrahim Yazdi, steps into the compound. He's accompanied by the Iranian armed forces. He takes the leaders of the assault aside and discusses something with them. Orders are shouted throughout the embassy and the attackers leave the area without further confrontation. Later, U.S. State Department spokesman Harding Carter thanks Ibrahim Yazdi for his help in the matter. The new Iranian government relays a message to their office in Washington, D.C., expressing their deep regrets for the incident to President Carter. The Iranian government promises complete security for the embassy and its staff going forward. 6 days later, the U.S. government is able to secure the release of Kenneth Krause. March 1979, 8 months before the storming of the U.S. Embassy. Tens of thousands of women across Iran unify in protest. It's March 8th, International Women's Day. They're opposing the mandatory veiling of their face that's been reinstated by the new government. The Revolutionary Committee gained support from the public by promising to transform Iran into an Islamic state. In this light, they've instituted many laws and rules that are oppressive to women and many minorities in the country. It's a glimpse into the future of Iran, where many rights are suppressed, and the laws force women to be subservient to men. On March 30th, an official referendum is held. The proposal for the nation to become an Islamic republic is put to a vote. No other alternatives are offered. But the referendum receives almost unanimous support from the country as a whole. The United States tries to forge ties between itself and the new republic, and there's even talk about increasing the Iranian security presence around the embassy in Tehran. In August, another vote is cast to elect the Assembly of Experts, composed of religious and political leaders tasked to finalize the new constitution. However, the government structure being formed is becoming eerily reminiscent of the dictatorship that the revolution sought to abolish. The first Assembly of Experts is composed of many of the revolutionaries that helped to overthrow the monarchy, but in the future, any new members must be approved by the Guardian Council. The Guardian Council is composed of 12 individuals who are experts in religious and constitutional law. However, they all must be endorsed by the Supreme Leader, who is the highest political and religious authority in the country. The Supreme Leader serves in position for life and controls the country of Iran. So, when all the jargon is stripped away, he is just another monarch or a dictator. September 1979, 2 months before the storming of the U.S. Embassy. Ibrahim Aziharzad consults with a number of Islamic leaders and associates at various universities across Tehran. He gathers support for what he hopes to be a second attempt to seize the American embassy in less than a year. A group of students that look to Aziharzad call themselves the Muslim student followers of the Imam's line. They stake out the compound, taking note of guard rotations and weak points in the security. Students sit on the rooftops of nearby buildings with pads of paper, recording everyone who goes in or out of the compound. These students cross-reference what they've observed with the previous occupation of the U.S. Embassy in February. In order for them to capture the building and hold everyone inside without bloodshed, they need to get past the Iranian guards stationed outside of the embassy walls. The Muslim student followers of the Imam's line carefully probe the police officers and Islamic Revolutionary Guards who are in charge of guarding the gate. They find several who are sympathetic to their cause. Many in Iran are afraid of the American-backed coup that will take back power from their popular revolution. The mistrust of the United States has only grown since the Shah was forced to flee the country. The following month, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini officially becomes the first supreme leader of Iran. He will rule for the next 10 years until his death in 1989. On October 22, 1979, former Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi enters the United States to receive medical treatment for chronic lymphocytic leukemia, a type of cancer of the blood. He's in great pain and only has limited time before the cancer consumes his body. Khomeini and the rest of the Iranian leadership condemned the United States government for allowing the Shah refuge in their borders when they've been trying to get the former Shah returned to Iran to face trial. November 4th, 6:30 a.m., minutes before the storming of the U.S. Embassy. The group of Muslim student followers of the Imam's line reached the walls of the U.S. Embassy. The guards have been paid off. They will do nothing to stop the incoming mob. Hundreds of students quietly get into position, and then all hell breaks loose. Someone uses bolt cutters to unlock the front gate. Students begin flooding into the compound while others climb over various sections of the wall. November 4th, 7 a.m., the storming of the U.S. Embassy begins. The students rush into the embassy in huge numbers. The staff is overwhelmed. They can do nothing but surrender to the angry mob. The young men and women who have broken in reassure the American staff that they are not trying to initiate hostilities, but are there in protest. Many tell the frightened Americans they mean them no harm. A larger crowd begins to gather outside of the embassy. It's no longer just made up of angry students, but Iranians from all walks of life. The powerful anti-American sentiment that swept through the country means the majority of the population wants to see any U.S. presence in Iran removed forever. This will start with the embassy and everyone inside it. More and more buses approach the compound. More demonstrators disembark and join the protesters inside and around the embassy. 7:30 a.m. American hostages are taken. The Marines at the embassy surrender peacefully. Everyone is blindfolded and brought out to the front of the compound so that news outlets and photographers can take pictures of the captured hostages. A hunt is on throughout the city for Americans who were not at the embassy at the time of the assault or who may have fled. Many are found and brought back to be held hostage with the rest. However, 6 Americans managed to avoid capture. They dash through the streets of Tehran, avoiding major crowds or areas where they might be spotted. The group of escapees crawl through sewage, climb over fences, and dart through empty buildings. A group of demonstrators marches by shouting anti-American propaganda. The escapees are afraid for their lives. They have no idea what has happened to the rest of their co-workers. Terrified and exhausted, they make one final push. They reach the gates of another country's embassy and plead with the guards to let them in. An angry mob is approaching. In moments, the Americans will be spotted. Back at the U.S. Embassy, the siege is over. All of the Americans who are there are now captured and being paraded out for the nation to see. The Muslim student followers of the Imam's line lay out their demand for the safe return of the American hostages. They request the return of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi so that he can stand trial. However, this will just be a formality, as everyone knows that if the Shah returns to Iran, he will be executed. November 5th, 24 hours after the American hostages are taken. The captors of the embassy had only planned on holding the hostages for a few days, even if their demands weren't met. They are students of Islam, not terrorists. However, once word spreads of the American embassy falling, support for the cause grows immensely. Khomeini praises the students holding the embassy. Washington, D.C. has been unusually quiet during this time. It's not clear why President Carter and his administration take so long to respond, but with every hour that goes by without a U.S. ultimatum, the support for the Muslim student followers of the Imam's line, capture of American citizens, grows. Things are becoming very dangerous, and there's still a long way to go. The safety of the 66 hostages being held at the American embassy in Iran has never been more tentative. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini throws his full support behind the hostage takers and other followers who have decided to rise up against all things connected to the United States. The British embassy is attacked. The militants claim that Britain is America's evil ally, and they too should be removed from the Iranian borders. However, the soldiers at the British embassy are able to mount a successful defense, and the attackers give up a few hours after the initial siege. The following day, the leaders of Iran's provisional government all resign in protest of the actions of Khomeini and his supporters. Things are getting out of hand, and they will not be held responsible if the United States military comes knocking at Iran's door. This leaves the government in the hands of Khomeini and his followers on the Revolutionary Council. The U.S. no longer has any sympathizers in Iran. The populace has become so indoctrinated with hate for Americans that everyone from the highest levels of government to the ordinary people of Tehran supports the hostage takers. Once again, cries for the extradition of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi dominate the conversation to reach a deal for the release of the hostages. November 7th, 3 days after the American hostages are taken, President Jimmy Carter sends emissaries to Iran with a personal note to negotiate the hostages' release. It's not known what is exactly in the note, but it's not enough to sway the Iranian government or the captors of the U.S. Embassy to let their prisoners go. These emissaries are not even allowed to enter Iran and return home empty-handed. On November 8th, the captors of the U.S. Embassy claimed they found documents that prove American diplomats had been engaging in espionage. They say that the U.S. is trying to undermine the authority of the people and the new government, although no evidence is provided at the time. This leads to acting Iranian Foreign Minister Abolhassan Banisadr declaring that the hostages may be released if the United States stops interfering in Iranian affairs. However, this is just one concession that needs to be made. The foreign minister, like the Muslim student followers of the Imam's line, want the return of the former Shah so he can stand trial, and a new demand is added. Now, in order to guarantee the safe return of the American hostages, the Iranian government wants all assets and possessions of the Shah given to them, as it is the stolen property of Iran. The United States openly states that Iran may make financial claims against the Shah in U.S. court, where U.S. law will determine the validity of the claims. The American government also says it will support an international commission to investigate the human rights abuses of the Shah's regime and help determine what reparations need to be paid. However, none of this will happen unless the hostages are immediately released. This is not good enough for the Iranian government or the hostage takers. No deal is made, and President Carter is forced to halt all oil imports from Iran. This is done to hurt the Iranian economy, but since 4% of the U.S. oil consumption is supplied by Iran, it also drives oil prices in the United States way up. On November 4th, the United States freezes all property, accounts, interests of the Iranian government and of the Central Bank of Iran in the U.S. November 15th, 11 days after the American hostages are taken, the captors of the embassy release a single hostage. He is an Italian cook who is deemed to not have any significant knowledge of the data and intel collected by the U.S. 2 days later, Khomeini orders the militants holding the hostages to release all women and people of color. They are deemed unlikely to hold any vital information as well. On November 18th, 5 black men and 4 women are released. The following day, 2 black Marines and a female secretary are also let go. By November 22nd, a total of 13 Americans have been freed from the U.S. Embassy and are on their way back to the United States. December 4th, 1 month after the American hostages are taken, the United Nations Security Council calls for Iran to release the American hostages or face possible sanctions. Billions of dollars in assets have already been frozen by the United States, and oil shipments are stalling. The U.S. calls on their closest allies to also boycott Iranian exports and place sanctions on the new regime. But the commitment of Khomeini and his government are unrelenting. They refuse to give in to the United States' demands until the Shah is returned and their assets are recovered. To make their dedication and commitment clear, Shahrir Mustafa Shafiq, the 34-year-old nephew of the Shah, is assassinated in the streets of Paris. The Iranian government doesn't even try to distance itself from the killing. January 28, 1980, 2 months and 24 days after the American hostages are taken, news spreads across the world that the 6 American citizens that escaped the initial attack on the U.S. Embassy have been smuggled out of the country. They had fled to the Canadian Embassy, where they were hidden, given refuge, and eventually returned to the U.S. The U.S. government and populace thank the Canadians for rescuing their people. Days after the announcement, the Canadian Embassy is closed in Iran. It's no longer safe for their people to be in the chaotic climate of Tehran, where foreign diplomats can be taken hostages at any point in time and held for ransom. April 7th, 5 months and 3 days after the American hostages are taken, Ayatollah Khomeini states that the hostages will continue to remain with the militants until the U.S. meets their demands. Upon hearing this news, the United States formally severs all diplomatic ties with Iran. 35 Iranian ambassadors are expelled from the U.S. borders, and even harsher economic sanctions are enacted. Iraqi forces launch an attack along Iran's border, targeting several oil facilities. The Iranian military is put on high alert. It's unclear if the United States, and in particular the CIA, has played any role in encouraging this attack. The hostages are still being held within the embassy. They sleep in the formal dining room and wash their clothes in the bathroom down the hall. Up to this point, they have been treated as diplomats, which is to say, they've been pretty much left alone other than being held against their will. However, things are beginning to deteriorate in Iran. The door to the dining room is now chained and padlocked shut, with multiple sets of guards standing watch 24/7. With uncertainty over how long Iran can endure the sanctions imposed by the United States and the growing tensions along the Iraqi border, the Iranian government and the militants holding the hostages become nervous. The United States has threatened the country with a possible naval blockade, but the militants respond that they will burn the U.S. Embassy to the ground with all the hostages inside it if the United States takes even the slightest military action against Iran. Over the last several months, the United States military has been gathering intelligence in Tehran. They know that the hostages are still in the embassy and that it's only a matter of time before the militants take things to the next level and harm them. On April 16th, President Carter approves a rescue operation. The United States will use all 4 branches of its military to infiltrate the city, secure the hostages, and get out as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, the rescue mission will end in disaster and cost the lives of several U.S. servicemen. April 19th, 5 months and 15 days after the American hostages are taken, United States forces start deploying throughout Oman and the Arabian Sea. They prepare for an assault on the Iranian capital and the rescue of the hostages. On April 24th, Operation Eagle Claw begins. U.S. troops secure the Desert 1 landing zone. A modified C-130 Hercules lands with supplies for the mission. 8 H-53 Sea Stallion helicopters take off from the USS Nimitz and set course for the landing zone on the outskirts of Tehran. However, only 6 arrive, as 2 experienced mechanical malfunctions and had to turn back. The remaining forces are preparing to infiltrate the city when a passenger bus is spotted in the distance. It is quickly approaching the landing zone. U.S. soldiers race into position and seize the bus full of more than 40 Iranian civilians. They cannot risk anyone alerting the militants holding the hostages that a rescue mission is underway. As the extraction force prepares to infiltrate the city, a dust storm sweeps across the area, decreasing visibility and grounding the helicopters. When the storm passes, another helicopter is deemed unfit for the mission. The commanding officers discuss the viability of the mission with only 5 choppers and determine it's not possible, and the rescue mission is called off. As the helicopters lift off to return to the Nimitz, one accidentally collides with the C-130 that's preparing to take off. The pilot loses control and the H-53 slams into the ground, exploding on impact. The C-130 is severely damaged and ignites in flames in the aftermath of the crash. 8 soldiers are killed. There's little chance that the Iranian military is no longer aware of the U.S. presence in the region after that explosion. The rest of the troops load into their transports and evacuate the area, leaving behind equipment, weapons, and the dead bodies of the men from the crash. On April 26, the Iranian government announces the hostages are being moved to a more secure location after they discovered the remains of the botched rescue mission. The bodies of the 8 American service members killed during the mission the day before are displayed outside the U.S. Embassy. Some of the hostages are moved to jails around Tehran, while others are brought into other cities in Iran. Any hope of a U.S. rescue mission goes up in flames with the failure of Operation Eagle Claw. July 1980, 8 months after the American hostages are taken, the United States has convinced most of the Allies to enact sanctions and economic embargoes against Iran. However, this has not convinced the Iranian government to hand over the hostages. On July 10th, Richard Queen, a vice consul, is released due to a life-threatening illness. 17 days later, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi dies in a hospital in Cairo. His body could no longer fight against the cancer that's been consuming him. This means that one of the terms of release for the hostages is no longer an issue. However, Iran still seems to be holding firm on the United States, making other concessions like returning property and wealth to the current Iranian government. September 12, 1980, 10 months and 8 days after the American hostages are taken, Khomeini declares 4 conditions that need to be met before he'll release the hostages. The first is the U.S. must return the now deceased Shah's wealth. The second is the cancellation of all U.S. sanctions and claims against Iran. The third is the unfreezing of Iranian funds in the United States. And the fourth is that the U.S. must guarantee it will no longer interfere in Iranian affairs. The United States does not send an official response at the time. 10 days later, on September 22nd, Iraq invades Iran, initiating an 8-year conflict that will cost hundreds of thousands of lives. The start of the war pulls the Iranian leadership's attention away from hostage negotiations at first, but as they realize the sanctions and embargoes the United States and its allies have put in place are severely hindering the war effort, they then try a different tactic. Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Ali Rajai pleads with the United Nations to send aid to Iran in order to help it fight back the Iraqi invaders. But many world leaders refuse to offer any kind of support until the hostages are released. Khomeini and his government vigorously renew negotiations with the United States through Algerian diplomats who act as middlemen. The Iranian demands for releasing the hostages have shifted to being predominantly based around the U.S. and its allies lifting their trade embargoes. November 4, 1980, 1 year after the American hostages are taken, thousands and thousands of Iranians gather outside the former U.S. Embassy to commemorate the 1-year anniversary of its capture. 2 days later, on November 6th, Ronald Reagan defeats incumbent President Jimmy Carter, winning the U.S. presidential election by a landslide margin. January 4, 1981, 428 days after the American hostages are taken, the Iranian government informs the U.S. that they now have full control of the 52 remaining hostages, and the militants who were originally holding them are no longer a factor. On January 16th, a U.S. Air Force jet flies U.S. and British bankers to Algeria to meet with American negotiators. They're trying to come up with a financial arrangement that will appease Iran. The proposal is sent to Iran and everyone eagerly awaits the response. 2 days later, the Iranian government accepts the agreement and says it will release the hostages. Plans are made to fly them to West Germany. An unexpected complication arises around the financial aspect of the deal. It seems as if the hostages will no longer be let go. The U.S. scrambles to rectify the issue. January 20th, 444 days after the American hostages are taken. The financial complications are fixed. The hostages are released from Iranian prison. All 52 American citizens are loaded into an Air Algeria Boeing 727-200 airliner and flown from Tehran to Algiers, Algeria, where Warren M. Christopher awaits to receive them. The flight then continues on to Rhein-Main Air Base in West Germany, where the hostages are sent to an Air Force hospital to assess their health. Former President Jimmy Carter welcomes the now freed Americans as an acting emissary. After their medical exams, the former hostages are debriefed and loaded onto an Air Force Boeing C-137 Stratoliner aircraft designated Freedom 1. The plane refuels in Ireland and then proceeds to Stewart Air National Guard Base in Newburgh, New York. The hostages are finally free and back on American soil. Now watch how SEAL Team took down Osama bin Laden minute by minute, or check out what if Russia launched a nuclear bomb minute by minute.